Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's an absolute honor to have you on and speak about all these interesting and important things. So yeah,
You're very kind.
why don't we get into it? The first question: what is your name? What are your pronouns? What is your ethnicity? And who are you?
My name is Pooya Mohseni. My ethnicity, well, I'm Iranian. I guess that would be my nationality. My pronouns are she, her. Who am I? I'm a born and bred warrior queen. Or warrior princess. Queen is too much responsibility. Probably more like warrior princess. Sure, I'll go with that one.
Boom, amazing. We love that. That's an incredible answer. Oh yes, excellent. And could you, I mean, in as much depth as you would like, describe what it was like coming to New York as a teenager and how you first got into acting? Because you have a really incredible story.
Well, I was 19 when I first came to New York. That was late 90s. What I didn't realize at the time was that New York was just recovering from the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and the early 90s. Um, and I had just come from a whole lot of trauma, being assaulted, being arrested, suicide, multiple suicide attempts, and all of that. And here I'd come to New York, and even though New York felt uninviting and maybe cold and gray, especially because I come from a warmer place and New York is, cold in fall and winter. I was just open. I never looked back. I think that is one of the things in my life. I just don't look back. I'm just always moving forward. And I went to FIT, for those who don't know, Fashion Institute of Technology. And that was where I started doing improv because they had a theater ensemble as an extracurricular group, and I joined that. And that had its own problems, people, when other people would be cast to play opposite me, they would be told that the person they're going to play opposite is a trans person and how they feel about it. But that was never asked of me.
Mm.
I wanted to join the model forum, which was again another extracurricular, and the head of the fashion department at that time said, I can't allow you to do that because you would make other girls uncomfortable. And I started doing background work on the series that were happening in New York at the time. This is roughly 99, 2000, 2001, like that period. And someone kind of, outed me on set when I was doing background work on Sex and the City.
Wow.
And that led to me being dropped by the agency that was representing me for background work at the time. And photographers didn't want to work with me when they found out that I was trans. So I was, I was treated like a pariah. I was pushed out, doors were closed in my face. So at that time, that was kind of like this, it could have been considered a failure, maybe just, wrong time, wrong place sort of thing. And I came back to it about 12, 13 years ago. After I had gotten married, I gotten divorced, I had worked as a designer, I had started a massage practice, and I was looking for meaning in my life, something beyond just having a job and having an apartment, like those things I had, but my life wasn't fulfilled. So I came back. I literally started from zero again, because obviously, nobody knew me from before. And I wasn't out because, because of what had happened to me prior. Um, and I kind of stayed in closet for a few years, a good 5, maybe 6 years, until it just started feeling a little claustrophobic. Like I couldn't understand why I was still staying in the closet. I mean, I could understand the reasons, but in my life journey, I couldn't justify it. It's like there was this more important thing that I had to do, which was to come out.
Mm.
And I can also tell you why it was important. Is some people say, it's inviting people in. I'm like, that's the semantics of like, am I coming out to you or am I inviting you in? That whoever wants to decide that is on them. But there were a few reasons. One of it was because I was looking back on the things that I had done in my life, the things that I had survived, whether it was, war, whether it was assault, whether it was arrest, whether it was suicide attempts, just the fact that I'd gotten myself to that point, I was like, how can I not validate this child's dream
Mm.
of finding their way to New York and finding their own life and still not be able to, be fully myself in the glory of my own truth? That was one, because I was like, this kid did not survive all of those suicide attempts to now live in the closet. It just didn't make sense.
Mm.
The other part of it was I have a certain love. Maybe again, it goes back to my sense of um, adoration for the courage of my younger self. Not me now, but the teenage me growing up in Iran. Now I look back and I'm like, that kid must have been absolutely crazy. Just like
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know how the hell I did it.
Right.
The glory of youth, the glory of youth.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, there are all of these other kids who also need to know that they're not alone. They need to know there are other people who are willing to stand in their own truth so they can also do it their own way. And also I look at it as, it's like we're all kind of holding flashlights
Mm.
in a way and showing people the way. Not so much do what I did, but here's light so you can figure out your own way.
Mhm.
And, all you need to do is just watch the news and see how much our kids are being attacked from different fronts. And I thought, well, maybe I can be a little voice of encouragement and affirmation and saying, I did it. If I could do it, you can definitely do it. I mean, like,
Mm.
I did it in the Stone Age. And that pushed me to come out, and I was willing to risk whatever career I had at that time. And here we are 7 years later.
Here we are. And when you did choose to come out, how, if I can ask, how was that sort of received and how did that impact your career at the time?
I mean, the majority of people, I think they were shocked.
Mm.
The thing that's supposed to be a compliment, but it's not really a compliment, that
Mm.
like I would have never known. Because it's not just that, you're so beautiful. It's like what it's really saying, you do not look like the weird freak that I would have thought you would be. It's
Right.
like telling somebody, but you don't sound black.
Right.
And it's, if you really think about it, it's not a compliment, really.
Mm.
And I think for the most part, people were shocked by the fact that they thought less of me, I think, before, in a way, because they're like, oh, here's another, tall, thin, kind of like, somewhat bougie, pretty like ex-model, whatever. What does she know about like life? What does
Right.
she know about hardship?
Mm.
And I think it made people do a double take. I'm like, oh, that person who looks like so put together and is just so common, like has gone through these things.
Mm-hmm.
And there were also some people that their mouths fell open, but not necessarily in a positive way.
Right.
Uh, people who uh, a distance grew, like men that I used to know,
Mm.
that we used to talk, maybe even flirt.
Mm.
And I think it made them feel uncomfortable. That's on them. But as a whole, on my career, I think, and this is something I would say as an actor and as a human, and what I've learned, one of the things that pushed me forward was at the time that I came out, I was working on two theater pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and they were actually revolving uh, either trans identity or some queerness. And I came to this point of realizing, how can I seek the truth of my character if I cannot live in my truth?
Mm.
And I feel that when I did that, it it took a lot of fear because, if you come out, then you're not afraid of people finding you out. So that's not happening in your mind. You're not asking for permission anymore because you don't have that fear. It's kind of like, you face your fear, you come out and you deal with the consequences. And so because I did that, I just think that when I walked into a room, there was just a different feel. And it was also as there were more queer roles being put out there, better queer roles being put out there. And it just also galvanized me. I'm like, well, you've come out, then now this is also your time to see what you can do for the industry. What is it? The Casting Society of America, their inclusivity subsection that has tried over the last 5-6 years to give more space to marginalized groups, whether it happens to be actors with disabilities, Native Americans, trans actors, Manasa actors, it's like, so they reached out to me on doing town halls about how to address the marginalization of queer actors. And, we sat and we talked different strategies, how to do a town hall, inviting both actors and the industry and having people kind of like have a conversation on both sides. And I was the moderator of that. This was 2017. And so, I've just become, I just have a big mouth chase. I've always had a sassy soul. And the older I get, the more I'm like, well, I guess I always did. So it's not like things have changed. But I see our responsibility that we are all these little chain links. Each of us is just one link. And when you put it all together, then you make a very strong chain. I'm inspired by people who come before me or who have done things before I did. People like Alexandra Billings, people like Ms. Bianca Lee, people like Candice Kane, or people even now, Shakina Nafak, MJ Rodriguez, Dominique Jackson, Angelica Ross. It's like, I mean, the list is long. There were just nobody that was from like West Asia or North Africa. And I felt that I was kind of representing that, as you said in your email, the representation of queer characters, like everything else, it first falls on white, right. Then from that it goes to Black, then from that it goes to Latinx, and people who are not in the first three, it's like we were basically other, whoever's not the first three. And I kind of use certain privileges that I have. Some people like, you're white adjacent. I'm like, I assure you, the industry has never treated me as white. Because you know how the industry works. So it's like, right. Nobody ever thought of me or treated me or cast me in a role that was supposed to be white. Right. But I use the privilege of, it's like my education, my upbringing, my discipline, the privilege that I had 20 years ago, the privilege of passing that allowed me to go through university at that time, to go to work, to be able to, it's like have a life experience as somebody who is not trans in many instances, even though I still lived with the fear of being found out and all of that. And I see that as the privilege that I use because I get asked into certain rooms and I get to kind of like point people at their blind spots, which is this idea of like, well, but you were obviously meant to be a woman. I'm like, you're literally only basing that on very arbitrary stereotypes that I have this like classic stereotypical, cis female look, but that doesn't give me any right to be more of a woman as opposed to somebody who does not. if I was a foot taller, I would still have to be respected as this. So it's not just,
Right.
and, being able to point out people's hypocrisies on the fact that when you say, well, you look like you're meant to be a woman, you are still following your prejudice, that you believe that I have the right to say who I am because I followed your idea of what a cis woman is supposed to look like. But I also understand that hypocrisy. And in some cases, if it allows me to be at a table or in a room that, let's say, other queer people may not be invited to, then that gives me the opportunity to point that hypocrisy out, or at the very least to be able to bring it to the forefront and say, like, I have no more right to be a woman than somebody who doesn't look like it. So these are the things I try to utilize. And also my age. I'm, in this business, we have an idea about age. I've been very open with my age, and I feel there's a certain confidence and certain life experience. Obviously, I've been around as long as I've been around, that it comes with it. And I just try to share that with other people and also learn from people who are either older than me or younger than me, because I'm a firm believer. Everybody can always learn. Everybody.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Something that you said resonated with me so heavily. And I actually wrote one of my grad school application essays on this and talking about how, like, you said that you're coming out. It's gave me what exactly you said, but I wrote my essay on how my coming out as a queer actor was so important to me, because it was like I was not living my truth as a human being. So how can I live my truth as a character and as an artist? Those things didn't seem to align. So I'm curious, how did your coming out sort of impact your acting craft? Do you think it sort of helped your evolution as an artist in some way, or?
As an artist, absolutely,
Mm.
because I feel that, when you look, as actors get older, they get better. And
Yeah.
I think it's the confidence they find in who they are as
Mhm.
people. And that's not true just about art. It's true about anything you
Mhm.
do. You can be a lawyer, you can be a teacher. It's just, you do it, rinse and repeat, rinse and
Right.
repeat, rinse and repeat. And the more you do, the more you find things that you didn't find out before. And I think that's part of getting older.
Mhm.
And so I think also coming out in the most basic level of understanding somebody who's never done that, it's like if facing something that you're afraid of, you're going to change. Now, whatever that may be, it may be bungee jumping for somebody. It may be walking out of an abusive relationship, which I think when you're in the closet is kind of like being in an abusive relationship with
Yeah.
yourself.
Right.
Um, because you're allowing other people to dictate your truth.
Right.
So facing it was facing this thing that I was afraid of. And then I faced it and I didn't die.
Right.
And so I came out on this side. So I didn't have that weight on my shoulder. I didn't have that fear on my shoulder. Yes. Did I also know? And somebody in very in no uncertain terms told me, that there are going to be people who are not going to want to work with you because of who you are. Like they're going to be either directors or producers or whoever. I'm like, well, I don't know if I necessarily want to work with somebody who
Right.
wouldn't want to work with me if they knew who I am.
Right.
Like I have earned that right as a human being. And I've heard other queer actors, and this is something, it's like gay actors have talked about for decades,
Mhm.
that people cannot separate the two. Somehow, for a straight hetero actor, they can play anything.
Right.
They
Yeah.
can play gay character, and everybody's like, "Oh my god,
Yeah. So
how
brave. Yeah.
great!" They win Oscars.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's also part of addressing the reality of the world, that we do live in a white cis hetero majority world,
Mhm.
that even when they accept us up to a point.
Right.
you know so they said, it's like there will be people that even though you look like a female lead, that you can be, it's like a romantic lead, that they would not like to put you in a romantic story that
Right.
doesn't have a queer tint to it.
Right.
So I know those things, and I've had young trans actors, especially young trans women, who said, well, I want to live in my truth, but I also don't want to be marginalized. My answer to that is we have to choose
Mm.
what is most important to us. I don't believe, for me, my truth and what it represents for me and my life and my legacy, that was more important for me. So that's what I did. Obviously, other people have to make their own decisions. As to how it affected my career, so yeah, I'm sure there are some people that have a problem, but I think it also just opened people up in a different way. It's like, because if a queer writer was writing something, they felt more comfortable asking me, part of the community essence. Um, or if there was specifically a trans character, it's like they could reach out. Um, the same is also true about being Iranian. It's just that, one was more obvious than the
Mm.
other one,
Mhm.
my name, the way I look, and all of that. And all in all, Chase, I personally have no regrets, obviously. I have no regrets. I did, because career comes and goes, but your life and how
Right.
you feel about yourself, um, do you respect yourself? Do you respect your decisions? That is, I think, something that stays forever.
Right.
And that is something that I believe is how we inspire other people, not just by what we say. We could sit here and become, Chase, this is what you should do. That's not worth a whole lot. But I can tell you, well, this is what I did.
Mhm.
And you can decide how much of that is something you'd like to try, or how much of that you're like, well, I'm not going to do that. But I'm a firm believer that we can truly only teach and inspire other people, not just by our words, but by our actions. And all in all, when I put all of it together, I have no regrets.
Mhm.
Also, the industry has changed a lot within the last 5, 10 years. I mean, when Transparent started, that really started a seismic shift. And Laverne, and then within the last 4 years, Pose was like this just explosion. I'm now thinking, it's like when they were starting to cast Pose, and I saw Ms. Rodriguez on, I think it was Sixth Avenue, and I'm like, oh, it's like they're casting this show. I think there's going to be a role in it for you. What the hell did I know? It's like, I'm like, I should be like, oh, my friend, do you remember that time when I thought I was gonna, help you with this? But a lot has changed. A lot has changed, and a lot has stayed the same. And by that, what do I mean? We have queer shows, but our non-queer shows don't necessarily have that much more queer characters in them. So it's like we've gotten our own corner, but we're not necessarily more represented in the universe of the heteronormative world.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think you know exactly what I mean by that.
Yes. But like you said, things do seem to be shifting in positive ways. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, what are sort of the kinds of roles and projects that excite you now at this stage in your career, or maybe in for your entire career?
I've always liked juicy roles. I
Mhm.
know. Said no actor
Right.
before or after. Um, I grew up watching classic movies. So I grew up with these, almost like unattainable goddesses, and these sassy, brassy women from, I don't know, Barbara Stanwyck, and then people like Barbara Streisand, I don't know, Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis. It's like, so I grew up with a lot of that. Um, and my idea was I always wanted to play women like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love playing fabulous women. I know.
Right.
I
Yes.
try.
As in your character from
Um,
English, extremely fabulous.
I know. But also when people ask me, they're like, what kind of a role you like? I'm like, I like a good role.
Uh,
What do I mean by that? I like a role who has agency, who has depth, who has humanity. The character doesn't have to be a nice character. I'm not really a huge fan of playing nice characters. I
mm,
think I've got a little grit in my soul. I like playing ever so slightly crooked characters.
mhm,
Um, but I like characters with depth. And when we were talking about, representation and how it's been changing, I think people should remember that there have always been, characters from like West Asia, Asia in general, or North Africa. They weren't well represented.
mhm,
They were there as, it's like villains or victims. They were very two-dimensional. They were there as plot points to push the narrative of, it's like the white hero or the
mhm,
hetero hero. And I feel what has changed within the last 5 years, more specifically, um, that the characters themselves have depth and arc and humanity and dimension.
mhm,
So those are the roles. I mean, if I was going to tell you, like, one day I would love to play Martha,
mm,
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
yes.
And I think I would kick ass in
Yeah.
that. Someday I would love to play Blanche, but usually, it's like Blanche is not, you know, traditional, not played by someone who looks like me or
Mm,
identifies as I do. That's not to say that will always be, because as we said, things are changing.
mhm,
Either new stories or reimagining old stories. It's like in a way that hasn't been done before.
mhm,
Like I think 3 or 4 years ago, we did a complete gender expansive and race expansive stage reading of Our Town, which is a very white play,
mhm,
very cis hetero play,
right.
but it was part of Michael Urie's Pride Plays.
Mm,
And we were the opening show. And it was even more amazing that the Wilder estate thought that it was so amazing that it was being done with all
wow.
of these ethnicities and, um, and as more things like that happen, that it stops looking like, I'm like, oh, they're just doing it for shock factor. Um, I feel like as more of that happens, even things that are happening now, um, like the company of 1776 on Broadway right now,
Mhm,
Diane Paulus
right.
directing it. It's an all-female cast,
Right.
different colors.
Mhm.
Um, I auditioned for that multiple times. I didn't get it, but we're not gonna go into that.
In the future, you'll
However,
get in
if I
someday.
if I had gotten into that, then I wouldn't be doing the play I'm doing right now in London.
Right.
So I'm also a believer that things happen. And if I was going to tell all the young performers, artists now, we always have this idea like things have to happen the way we want them. And the older I've gotten, the more I realize you just keep doing your work
Mm,
and things fall into the place that they have to fall into. It may not be what you hoped or anticipated, but it will be the right thing. You just keep doing your thing, and it'll fall into place.
right.
Um, or Oklahoma, uh, which is now multicolor. There are queer actors in it, trans actors in it, and I think as more and more of this happens, now am I under a certain delusion that it is well received everywhere?
Mm,
No,
right.
but as we said, change happens slowly
Right.
because a lot of people don't like change.
Right.
It threatens them because then they would have to question themselves and the way they live, the way they identify, what they feel comfortable in. So things like that are changing, but also aside from that, obviously, there's a show like English,
Mhm,
written by a fabulous Iranian American playwright that depicts an Iranian group of people in a way they've never been depicted before.
mhm,
You have something like that. I've co-written two short films about um, two very different trans women. One of them is just within a New York setting. The other one is within the context of an Iranian American family and trying to do stories that people haven't done or people have done, but not in this particular way. And I think that's how change happens because change just doesn't happen. People keep pushing that you know, that line a little bit at a time. And that's how change comes about.
Yeah, absolutely. And your, I mean, you touched on this a bit, but how has your, specifically your Iranian ancestry and identity and nationality, sort of impacted your career, not only in the beginning, but in the last couple of years or so?
Well, every room that I walk into, inevitably, I'm both.
Hmm.
So the two aren't separate from
Right.
one another. And there have been, and I see that as a privilege because I get to be in Iranian rooms and I also get to be in queer rooms. And I kind of see myself, it's like I get to be in rooms that like the people from that room don't get to be in that other room.
Mm.
Um, and maybe a few years ago, I would have looked at it as like that's keeping me out of some room. Because like they're casting a trans character and they're
Mm.
like, well, this character is trans and that's as much controversy, so this character just has to be white or black. Like, we're not going to also make it exotic and make it a different color. But I look at it that I get to be in English, and that's because I'm Iranian.
Hmm.
And now I get to be in this play in London, not because I'm Iranian, but because I'm trans.
Mm.
um and I also want to remind people that it's like it's not also I got the role because I was Iranian. It's there were a lot of Iranians who
Yeah.
auditioned for that role, and I got it
Mm.
because some people also, people who begrudgingly say, well, now it's fashionable to be this or that. I'm like, no, we have to work as hard, if not much harder than other people, because not only do we have to go through the door, we also have to just break some doors that don't even want to open for us. Um, and that has pushed us to really hone our craft because we don't want to give people a reason to not hire us. So I see it as, my darling, it comes down to how do you want to look at your life and yourself. I look at these things together as a privilege. I get to see world in a more expansive way than if I wasn't one or the other. I'm not just Iranian. I'm Iranian and I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah.
I'm trans. So I've had part of my life as being treated like a boy. And then I've had my entire adult life of being treated as a female. So I have multiple points of view about privilege, about marginalization, about how people treat you when they think one thing about you versus when they find out something else about you. And I look at it as all of that as things that have allowed me to be a more expansive human being with a wider scope and understanding of humanity.
And I love what you said though, a minute ago. It's like they forget, however, that they don't just give you work because you have intersecting identities. Like you actually have to be good, and you have to do the work to earn your career. And
Yeah.
I hate the microaggressions that sort of are coming up from a lot of people who don't necessarily, like you said, like seeing the changes that are happening. Um, but yeah, I also wanted to sort of on that train of thought shift a bit and ask you about the current situation that is taking place in Iran. Yeah, we can take we can take a little breather here, um, because I feel that much of what you said in your experience will align with what we're about to talk about. But yeah, if you could, I guess, just in as much detail as you wish, um, sort of talk about what is currently happening in Iran. What are sort of the events that led up to it? I know we're talking about a long time frame of history leading up to
I
these.
will try to concise the history
Yeah, and
lesson.
I right.
So, there was a revolution. There was an Islamic revolution in 1979. I was a year old at the
Mm.
time. Um, but then it, like most revolutions, it didn't quite go in the direction that people thought. The ideas behind that revolution was equality, as most revolutions are. It's about, equality and fighting corruption and people having a voice. Well, that's not what happened. That's definitely not what happened.
Mhm.
And this oppression that people are fighting against now, it's been going on. I mean, it's a revolution that started with mass executions.
Right.
Whether it happens to be political minorities, it's like activists, uh, different political fractions, like that is not something that is allowed. There's no such thing as queer identity in Iran on the outside. Like when Ahmadinejad said, we don't have gay people, which people laughed.
Right.
What he's talking about is that we do not have such a thing as being openly gay in Iran.
Right.
Because if you are, if it's even a rumor, you can use your livelihood. If you are caught in the act of engaging with someone of the same sex, you will be executed, or you will be forced into gender reassignment surgery because they believe that gender reassignment is really corrective surgery that turns a gay person into a straight person. Like that's where the mindset is.
Right.
Trans people, let's say there used to be even that the last few years, some of the very radical people have even been preventing young trans people from getting the documentation they need to be able to get gender affirming care. But even that, it's more like they give you a car without giving you fuel. So yes, in a very technical way, you can transition, and what that means, you can have surgery, but actual transition time, hormone therapy, legal help, legal protection. It's like you can be prevented from going to university because you're trans. You can be fired from your job. Your parents can throw you out. There are no legal protections. And so what is going on now and has been going on now for over 5 weeks in Iran, it's this boiling point of something that has been getting hotter and hotter over the past 43 years of people. I was arrested 4 times between 16 and 18 because like my hair was considered too long, or because I seemed androgynous, or because I was walking in a place that I shouldn't have been walking, or I had a t-shirt on, or I had, it's like denim on. It's like, this is too westernized, this is subversive, these are anti-revolutionary. Women who have been arrested, who have been beaten, who have been violated in different ways because their hair was outside of their hijab. So the young woman, the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, how this, it's like these protests really, the explosion came because this 22-year-old girl had come to Tehran with her family. She apparently had some of her hair out of her hijab, and the morality police arrested her. And 2 days later, she went into a coma and died. And they said, well, we didn't touch her. She had a panic attack and she just fainted and then she died. Except that I should also create this, parentheses here, that this is also what happens to a lot of people when they get arrested. And then they magically die of natural causes within a week or two. They have a heart attack, or they accidentally fall off the balcony off a 12th floor. I don't know how that happens. So, this woman was beaten and she had concussion and she died. And this just, opened resentment that had been building, economic corruption, oppression on the street towards minorities, religious, ethnic, not so much the queer movement, because we're not a very queer inclusive culture in Iran. Even though like 2 months ago, there was a death warrant that was signed for 2 queer activists in Iran. And there was some, backlash, but it was like very minimal. That was not the thing that ignited these protests. The thing that ignited was the 22-year-old girl. Right. And I do talk about it. It's like, I'm like, her life is precious, but let's also just be clear that most people didn't think that the lives of the queer people who been executed in the last 43 years. The journalists, the political activists, all of these people who've been arrested, beaten, tortured, whatever, their lives didn't matter. But there was a certain commonality about this young girl that didn't have any of the other factors attached to it, so that everyone got behind it. Everybody started feeling, well, this could be me, or this could be my daughter, or this could be my sister, or this could be my neighbor. And the more people came out, and the more the regime has been fighting out, now tens of teenagers have been killed in the protests. And every person, somebody had made a video, which I love what they said, and it was addressed to the regime. It says, so just every one person you kill, you are gaining 20 more people that want to kill you.
Right.
And they said, every one of you that we kill, that gets rid of 20 people on your side. Because on our side, we already know you're going to kill us one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But on your side, these are the people that are only there because they're being paid to. And at some point, they're going to think it's not worth it.
Right.
So this is what has really led up. I mean, I'm trying to simplify it. Obviously, we all know about, women's rights in Iran, like things that are in law. Let's say when it comes to inheritance, a daughter's share of the inheritance is half of a son. So, whatever,
Oh,
wow. Something like that. A woman cannot get married without the written consent of her father. A woman cannot leave the country without the written consent of her father or her husband. These things. And these are not things that women who have access to internet, who have been educated, you cannot sell this bullshit to people who have self-respect, because you're basically telling them, just accept that you're worth less. Well, they're not going to take it. You beat them, they're going to get up. I mean, I was in an abusive marriage, and at one point, it's like, I'm like, no. You might kill me, you might bash my head in, but I'm going to go down with a fight. And that's what's happening in Iran. It's now been going on for, I think, 36, 37 days. It's in, I think, over 100 towns and cities in Iran. I honestly feel that what is happening, it's a revolution, because since 1979, nothing like this in Iran has happened on this scale, with this longevity, this consistency, and this expansiveness of how many groups in society are fighting it. So it's not just women or girls of a certain age. It's girls in elementary school. It's girls in university. It's women on the street. It's men in university. It's different ethnicities, different religions. They've all come together because they've all been pounded to a pulp for so long that one of the chants was basically, you're going to kill us anyway. You're just slowly killing us, so we might as well fight for it. And in no way am I saying to glorify death of anybody, but you get to a point that you are squeezed so tight that the only way is to explode. And one of the other interesting things that has happened, the corruption and the level of brutality is even seeming so gratuitous and so heinous to people who, until 2 months ago, they were still supporting the regime. People who have given their sons to the Iran-Iraq war, who have martyrs in their family, who've had people who've died for the revolution. And now they're saying, we didn't have our family members die so you could do this with it.
Mm.
So the best way I can describe it, think of it as an onion.
Mm.
And if you know the most central core of the onion is like the most ardent core of the regime, people who basically, it's like if the regime falls apart, like, they're done. They'll either be executed or they'll be exiled or whatever happens. And then the people who financially are connected with them. And then you keep coming at, it's like people who lost family members in the war, people who are very religious, people who are very devout, and you keep coming, it's like the less and less devout and linked to the regime. So, more Western, more left, more whatever. And that onion has just been peeling over
Right.
the years. And at this point, it feels like it is very close to the core of that onion.
Yeah. And so what we're sort of seeing, at least on the news that we're seeing, but what I have seen from, for example, your Instagram posts, and on social media is, like you said, like an uprising that sort of started with a lot of Iranian women taking to the streets, um, et cetera, et cetera. But as you're saying, like this is an issue. There's multiple issues that are sort of coming up, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes.
So I guess, what are some of the things, and you touched on this a moment ago, but what are some of the things that the protesters are sort of asking for and ultimately trying to achieve?
You see, for the past 20 years, uh, protesters, uh, because it's also like something like this doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It's over the past 20 years where there have been elections that people felt were rigged, that people felt were stolen, that they've lost trust in the system, that they are not being listened to when they say, it's like, we want this right. Like, what would be, to address the corruption in the government. Like the price of petrol is too high. An average family has a hard time being able to afford food for their family, or to afford, it's like just a life. To be able to have good education, to have good life, whatever that means to them. Part of it is, it's like being able to free to walk with your significant other holding their hand, to be able to go out and have fun with your friends without being arrested, to be able to go to a restaurant as a young person and being able to enjoy yourself without fear of getting raided. And what that also does, that means the families of these young people are also always under stress, because, it's like when I was a teenager and I was arrested multiple times, well, that stress, of course, goes into my parents, because they're
Right.
like, well, what is going to happen to this child? So what they've been asking for is, it's like these things we talked about: transparency, dealing with corruption, more freedom, and a more open space for dialogue. And the regime is a theocracy, which, for people who don't know, it's basically a regime based on teachings of a particular religion. In our case, it's this combination of a communist structure and Islam. So it's not a communist country, but the oppression and the tight hold comes from, it's like what used to be the USSR model and the Eastern Bloc. It's like at the height of the Iron Curtain, and a bastardized version of Islam teachings. So when they call it Islamic Republic, it's not really a republic, and it's not really Islam.
Right.
It's like saying, well, ISIS, they were Muslim. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, there are all of these other Muslims in the world, and they didn't do the thing.
Right.
It's like the Christian right.
Right.
They take it as Christianity, but then you look at it, you're like, that's not really Christianity. It's their interpretation of it, which, I guess two people can look at the same thing and get very different messages. And that's what people have had enough of, that they've tried to do these protests. They're like, okay, we feel that the election is stolen. They get squashed.
Right.
Okay, people go on strike because, they're not getting paid. They get squashed or they get imprisoned. Um, Students at universities, all of these things that you keep protesting and you get arrested. And then you get to a point of you're like, well, the smallest thing I do to exercise my humanity and being a member of society, being, a responsive member of a country, of a social structure, and you're not allowing me to do that. And that's the thing about dictatorships. Dictatorship cannot loosen, because if you loosen, it's like a crack in a dam.
Mm.
If you let one crack go in a dam, that crack is going to expand, which is basically what has happened. But this is also the other thing about a dam. You hold it very tight. At some point, that dam is going to crack. Because I always say, happy people don't revolt.
Yeah.
But even more importantly, people who cannot provide for their family, because you can say, well, people have comfortable lives, but they can't say X, Y, and Z. Sure, there are people who are going to protest that, but there are also going to be a lot of people, well, I have the roof over my head, I have my family, I can put food over, it's like on the table for my family, I can do that. And a lot of people, that's enough for them. But when you get to a point that a lot of people have a hard time with that as well, then that's aggression on top of aggression. Not only can you not say X, Y, and Z, not only can't your child do that, not only can your wife, go to work without the fear of, it's like being harassed because, like, two pieces of her hair are out of her job, but now you also can't make ends meet. And when you add all of that together, it's it's an explosive combination.
Yeah. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding, or maybe, I mean, maybe you have other ideas about how this could go, but that it's going to be it could be a very long sort of process, a long battle that is starting some major social upheaval.
At this point, because for many years there were people who were open to modification. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, the regime doesn't have to change, but things have to change within the regime. At this point, whoever's on the street, even, including my mother, who, it's like lived through one revolution, and she's like, right, revolutions just make things worse.
Yeah.
But even my mom, she's like, about 5-6 years ago, I realized that the only way things would change is regime change. So at this point, anybody that's on the street, nobody thinks that this regime is going to change, because it has had many opportunities to do it. It has not. It has shown no intention, and nobody is under the illusion that, even after the protests started, they're like, well, it's not part of the law for women to have hijab. It's like, you're like, seriously? For 40-something years, you have made the lives of women miserable because of this stupid thing. And now suddenly you say, well, it's not, kind of like too little too late.
Yeah.
So, and also I feel this is all one of the galvanizing forces. The people on the street, they know if they don't keep going and if they back out, they're going to be killed.
Right.
As you've seen the videos, the regime has no problem with brutality.
Right.
They are known for brute force. I mean, there have been teenagers in their early teens that have been killed in these protests. People as young as like 12, 14.
Oh, wow.
So the people who are protesting, they know it's like a point in a relationship when the two people have said something to each other and there's just no going back. There is no going back. Right. There's no, let's sit at a table and see what there's not. The people are basically saying, we don't want you at the table anymore.
Right.
Because you have shown that you do not act in good faith. So where do I think it's a revolution?
Yeah.
Now, where that revolution goes, well, my dear Chase, if I knew the future, it's like I played the lottery. One of the things a lot of people talk about, they're like, one of the very unique things about this movement is that it doesn't have a singular leader, in that it's been very spontaneous, that has also connected people. It's like across ethnicity, across religion, across gender lines. Again, in Iran, not a whole lot of queer inclusion for the reasons that I mentioned before, but in the ones happening outside of Iran, unfortunately, I've seen some that the protests for Iran have been queer exclusive, that they did not want to exclude queer people. But I've also seen ones that were queer inclusive. Okay. That's where it is. The only thing I can say for sure, there's no going back.
Right. Yeah, there can't be.
Like, either one side will have to destroy the other. I'm putting my money on the people, because over the last 5 weeks, we're now at a point, we went from 4 cities to now 100 cities.
Right.
There are now strikes in, it's like trucks, parts of the oil industry in Iran, which is like our only main industry that we have. There are parts of, teachers unions, nurses unions. That's what I meant. Every person that they kill ignites this fire a little more, because people are realizing this could be my daughter, this could be my son, this could be my significant other. It's become very much that is very tangible to each and every person. Whereas a few months ago, they're like, well, those are queer people, or those are, political dissidents, or that's that particular religion. Now they can't say that, because now it's kind of like, 22-year-old lovely girl who's just walking down the street, she can be arrested and then end up dead in a few days. It's kind of like, it's that straw.
Right.
And I feel like the back of that camel has been broken.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to ask you, as an Iranian person in the world who is living through this, how are you? How are you holding up?
I am an Iranian person. I'm an Iranian American person. I'm also an Iranian American trans person. So I'm used to having people in my communities being marginalized and brutalized, unfortunately. I feel the pain of it in my soul, even though part of me is like, well, that society didn't care for me when I was young. But I don't believe in grudges, because when I see that teen girl who's full of life getting killed, that's a life lost. And it doesn't matter if it's a queer life or a non-queer life. Maybe for me, maybe I find it even more precious, because I see the fact that every life is precious. And I hope we get to a point that everybody believes that people will be just as outraged when it's a queer young girl that's killed, and not, somebody who kind of like clicks all the appropriate boxes. She's young and she's innocent and she's lovely and she's this and that. But also, I've had to fight my whole life. I've seeing people around me who've had to fight their whole life. I mean, I'm a daughter of an Iranian woman. I saw how she had to fight for her place in society against my dad, against, her workforce. She was like somebody's daughter, somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's coworker. And so I had seen that. And I'm used to this. But a part of it makes me feel proud in the fact that that is what I come from. And I feel what has allowed me to survive and thrive is that experience of when you know what it's like to be marginalized, you also know how to fight.
Mm.
And every night I go to bed and I pray that the people of Iran, that they gain their freedom back. Um, Even though I probably will never go back to Iran, but I want them to have a country where they will be proud and happy to live in, and not everybody will have to migrate somewhere else.
Right.
Um, but I left because there was no life there for me. Um, that doesn't mean I don't want that for other people.
Mm. Yeah. I did want to ask you also, because you sent me before our conversation, a petition to sign. So I did want to ask you, what are some of the organizations that we should know about? Are there any actions that we can take to support the Iranian people, to support Iranian women, Iranian?
Well, there are, as I said, the petition that I sent you was the petition at change.org, asking the leaders of the G7 countries. I don't know the exact wording of what it is. It's like to basically expel all Iranian diplomats. But when I was actually searching for that, if you just change IranChange.org, there are multiple petitions. One is to help queer activists. One is to, it's like to expel Iranian diplomats. There are many different kinds. If you're on Instagram, there are amazing people you can follow that can give you incredible information. People like Nazanin Bonyadi, uh, uh, people like Tara Gerami. There are just a lot of amazing voices out there. Maz Jobrani, it's like people that we know in America as comedians, actors. Um, at this point, it's like CNN is doing a lot more on this, and there are more petitions coming. I wish that there was a petition that I said, well, this is how you can support the protesters, because there are talks of being fundraisers to be able to financially support the protesters who are basically not working. So to be able to financially support them so they can continue to do that. I haven't had access to them, but these are things, even in my Instagram posts, I usually don't tell people, it's like, I'm like, follow me because I know everything.
Mm.
I usually tell people, it's like, these are the people who I follow, and these are the people you can also follow. The people I follow are, Nazanin Noor, Tara Gerami, Navid Negahban, Maz Jobrani, Nazanin Bonyadi. These are things, everybody knows people in their circles that are either from Iran or were born here of Iranian ancestry. We're all posting. I honestly don't think there's any of us right now that is not posting about these things. It's giving voice to it. It's sharing it, using the hashtag of Iran protests or Mahsa Amini. These are the
Mm.
things that I know, because at the end of the day, we all want to help, but what we can actually do for the people in Iran right now is limited,
Mm.
other than making sure that their voice is being heard loud and clear. And there's also this very unholy alliance with the Iranian regime and Russia right now, that they're
Oh.
sending drones that are being used in Ukraine. So people are Ukraine are rising alongside people of Iran. And there's something really beautiful, because until 6 months ago, these people were definitely not friends. But
Yeah.
right now, I think everybody's realizing we're all fighting for the same thing. It's like,
Right.
as a queer activist, when a cis woman says, "You're taking my identity," I'm like, we're all fighting for the same thing.
Uh-huh.
We're all fighting for equal respect. We're all fighting for safety. We're all fighting for equal share of society. I don't know how my identity would take anything. And now, when all of these people are coming together, it's really, there's something tragic that this is what has to bring people together. But the beauty of it is that it is doing that. And I hope that people are realizing that aside from politics, humanity doesn't know ethnicity, doesn't know nationality, doesn't know religion or gender identity. Um, this is where I am. Christian Amanpour is doing a lot of coverage of this, but these are the things on Instagram, on Google, on Twitter. If you literally go on Google and it's like put Iran news, you can see what it is. You can amplify that voice in your own circles. That's all we can do now, because it is apparently, and understandably so, those people knowing that they're not being left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, there is a lot that can be learned and done through social media. So, um,
And there's also
yeah.
a great deal of similarity between the oppression that women of Iran are facing and the laws that are now being pushed forward in America, whether it comes to abortion rights, trans youth affirming care. It's like what is it? Um, Voting rights, all of these things. It's, basically Americans should see that this is happening on a more drastic scale in Iran, but it's the same fight. It's,
Right.
in one word, it's autonomy.
Yeah.
If you can't tell me what I can do with my hair or not, you can't tell me what I can do with my body.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. And I think solidarity, we come up with so many things that separate us, but I think if we take a step back and take a breath, we realize it's so much easier to allow people to be who they are and see the things that bring us closer together.
Yeah.
Because whether you like to, and I'm using this as a euphemism, if you like to eat cucumber versus watermelon, that's your business. If I don't like cucumber, then I don't have to eat cucumber. But that doesn't mean I should take it out of your mouth.
Mm. We truly are a human community, and I think people forget how interconnected we all are. So I definitely agree that yeah, there's these stories need to be told, and there's voices that we should uplift, and one of them is yours, of course. And so I did want to ask you on an equally sort of uplifting note on what is the current project you're working on? Yeah, or I guess I don't know if you can spill, but
Well, let me ask you,
or
when is this podcast going to be aired?
hopefully within like a week or so. Or if
Okay.
you can't answer that
So,
question, what other projects can we look
well,
for?
I can tell you a little about it.
Okay.
Um, so, I mean, as an Iranian American actor, to be asked to come as a guest artist to London,
Mhm.
you're a New York artist. It's a dream and it's an honor.
Mhm.
And add to that the fact that I am an immigrant, the fact that I am a queer artist, to get the opportunity to be in a room and work with an Oscar winner and a Golden Globe winner, with people who have done amazing things for decades longer than I have. It's a room that I would have never thought I'd be in.
Mhm.
And to get to be in that room, it's such a, like, let me pinch myself, like, is this really happening to me? But I also feel that me being in that room is part of that change that we're talking about, that um I'm showing the people in the room, here we are.
Yeah.
And we're going to show our audience, here we are. Uh, Life and humanity has many, many, many colors, and we're just one of those colors. Um, I love getting to be in London for 3.5 months
Mhm.
working on this.
Oh wow.
Um, it's really fabulous. I will be done here at the end of January.
Hmm.
So, lucky me that
Yeah.
I get to be here at the Mini A Chocolate Factory and be directed by the amazing Terry Johnson. It's just, oh my God. Um, on the other side, I have co-written and co-produced and co-starred in two short films, one of which just hit the festival circuit about a month ago, called Transit, a New
Mm.
York City fairy tale that we did a couple of years ago, and it finally came out. And another one that hasn't come out yet, called Always Azizam, which means always, my dear. Um, and that giving representation not just to me as an Iranian, but as an Iranian actor of trans experience in a positive way, that I had control over where the story goes and finding people who want to tell that story with you. So these are things that are coming out.
Extremely exciting, and congratulations. Definitely looking forward to seeing those projects, and just selfishly putting in, I hope English gets a revival at some point, because I absolutely loved that. I think that's the best show since I've been in New York. That's probably my favorite show.
Well,
So
English is actually that's also what happened, because I mean, English is actually right now being done in Boston,
oh really? Okay.
and it's also going to be done at Studio Theater in DC.
Okay.
And I was going to do that, but there
Uh,
was a conflict between that and this project that I'm doing in
mhm.
London. So obviously I couldn't do both.
Right.
But that play is incredible,
Yeah.
and I honestly hope it gets to go amazing places and also create work for a lot of,
Mhm.
Iranian actors that otherwise do not get their time in the
Mhm.
line. I also hope that it gets a chance to go to bigger theaters.
Yes.
We're thinking, if it goes to LA or if that comes to London, I would really love to be part of that. Um, but there's also something about an actor when you originate a role.
Mm.
And I'm also very proud of English, because I've been part of the English team since its first public reading 4 years ago.
Wow.
So I have a certain
Yeah.
attachment to that. But it also happens that you get to a point and you have to release that role
Hmm.
for other people to breathe their own version of life into it. And it's not easy,
Hmm.
but you just have to realize that, as an artist, you do your interpretation and you have to put it out there for other people to
Right.
put their own marks on it. So English is not going anywhere. I
Yeah.
mean, English is here to stay. There are
Okay,
many
good.
people that are going to do it. Uh, and I hope to be able to see, some production at some point, because, well, when you're in it, you can't watch it.
Right.
Um, but I'm very proud of Sanaz,
Hmm.
the work that she did. She's my girl. I'm
Hmm.
very proud of the direction Canute gave. It
Mm.
made our play. The word people used was elegant.
Oh.
He did a
Mm.
very elegant, his vision was very elegant, and the direction was, very subtle,
Yeah.
almost sublime. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud to have been part of that at Atlantic Theater.
Yeah, it was done with such care, and some people maybe overuse these kind of statements, but it just really felt so personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very moving. So, thank you for that. Even though that took place many months ago, hopefully we get to see you in that role again at some point. Yeah,
Well, we'll
knocking on wood.
see.
But that's me being my selfish, um, uh, I guess, take right there. But yes, last but not least, how can we get in touch with you on social media, your website?
I would say the easiest, it's like I'm a one trick pony when it comes to social media. I'm Pooya Land on everything, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Even my website is Pooya Land. That's Pooyaland. You know, like
Mm,
Disneyland, but not.
there you go.
The easiest way probably to find me, see what I'm doing, or get in touch with me is through Instagram.
Okay.